So this is an esteemed panel, and I'm really excited to have you guys here today. We're going to do a little bit of a time machine for the next 30 minutes. We're going to go back 10 years, and then we're going to go forward 10 years. And in doing that, we're also then going to invite the audience. There have been some questions that have come in, and we're going to give the audience a chance to kind of interrogate you guys about what you think in terms of the future of media and technology in New York. But I want to go back 10 years ago to this now legendary report, which was NYC.media.2020. So, Steven Strauss, why don't you just begin by talking about what the plan for this report was, and then what the outcome was, and then we'll let our other panelists, Justin and Maria, join in and kind of poke at that report a little bit.
Okay, well, take this back to the financial crisis, 2008 or so. The economy's in free fall. So, I'm an industrial organization expert, PhD, management consultant. Well, what do? You try and figure out what the future looks like. And, economic development is almost like playing any game of sport. You're not trying to hit the ball where it is at this exact moment. You're trying to figure out where it's going to land. So a lot of this was trying to figure out where the economy was going. I do just want to, before we hop into this, I just want to acknowledge a few things. Media NYC 2020 was part of a larger series of projects looking at almost all the sectors of the New York economy: fashion, clean energy, financial services. Ann Lee, who's now at JP Morgan, Christy Sunjaja, now at Taboola, Peter Price, whose Rolodex I shamelessly borrowed to make the thing happen, and Bob Lieber, who was the deputy mayor for economic development, and all sorts of other people I'm not mentioning played a big role in this. So anything that was good in the report, to their credit. Anything bad probably was me. And by the way, a big shout out to Oliver Wyman, who contributed a lot to this. So I guess I'll talk about maybe what we got right, and
all right,
some things.
But button it up a little bit, because our audience isn't going to read it. So, what's the short version? Give us the précis version for impatient virtual audience members.
All right. The high-level version of all of this was we saw four kind of big trends hitting the New York economy, at least as media was concerned. The rise of international. The U.S. had gone from being 50% of the world economy to 20-ish% of the world economy since World War II. International is going to be a lot more important. Innovation, the digital revolution, that the world was going digital, and that was going to be as profound a change for the American economy and the media industry as the rise of automobiles in the early 20th century. That this is all about talent. That, New York City, 200 years ago, New York City's advantage was, the Erie Canal linked New York to the Midwest. And a lot of what drove the early history of New York was the port, the logistics, the transport. Fundamentally at this point, it's down to human capital and the things that go with human capital: museums, theaters, research institutions. And then finally, what we called connectivity, agglomeration economics. Productivity tends to go up as you increase the density of knowledge workers. And so, we kind of have a nice little cycle here of things we need to do. Plug into the innovation economy, need to bring in talented people, need to be thinking much more about international. If we get talented people together, productivity goes up, and you keep going around in a nice cycle.
Wait, hold on. So this is a perfect place for me to kind of jump a little bit forward. So this report got lots of things right, lots of things wrong. We'll talk about that. But one of the things it did was it planned for and called for the construction, the development of the NYC Media Lab. So Justin, I presume there's at least pages in this report that you're very fond of.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think words in Steve's mouth, but one of the things that it seemed to suggest with situating the question of the future of the media industry amongst the city's other institutions, and thinking about the universities as these, drivers of talent and sources of new technology, because primarily it is only about talent. It's not really about tech. And so that idea, I think, was the right one at the moment. And we'll get into this, I'm sure, later. But it feels to me like the way we'll get out of the current crisis is again to sort of double down on that idea. The human capital here in New York will again, be the lifeline.
So Maria, you weren't involved in the drafting of this report, which gives you kind of a free pass on being able to criticize it without having your words on the page. When you do a lot of this future thinking and kind of hardcore economic thinking. When you go back and read it, like, does it seem like are the hits and misses just the nature of future planning, or is there something more to look at when we go back 10 years to where we thought New York was going?
So I think the fact of the report was as or more important than the content of the report. And I say that because the New York technology sector, we're now number 2 in the United States, if not the world, really grew very differently than the rest of the other innovation hubs. We were not driven by universities spinning out technology to start new companies, which was the case for Stanford, the West Coast, and for Boston. Our tech sector was formed by people really coming out of large corporations, taking advantage of the new applied technology tools that were available now to everybody, basically the internet. So if you look at the first generation of technology, which started in the late 90s, we had a boom and then we had a bust, a little bit like laying those railroad tracks of the 19th century. And then it collapsed. We had basically an infrastructure in place of entrepreneurs who had been successful 1.5 times. So then the industry started to recover slowly. And when the Bloomberg administration came and started paying attention to this to that sector, specifically with this report in 2008, I would say that the fact of paying attention to the innovation economy was one of the most important things that they did, because they, in particular, the mayor was excellent at this. He talked about it, he promoted it, he visited the technology companies, he showed them a lot of love. And so that helped with visibility internationally of New York. It drew entrepreneurs here, and it made the entrepreneurs here feel valued and that they were part of the broader economy of New York and not just sitting off on themselves. And then the second thing that they did, primarily with the engineering campus, which is in my top 5 great things that Bloomberg did for New York, is they connected and they started connecting the universities to the tech sector. The universities played very little role in the first 10 years in terms of their contribution to building the innovation economy. And with the coming of that engineering campus, it was a big, splashy international project that got a lot of attention, a lot of press. We remember that Mayor Bloomberg is a media guy, so he knows how to work the media to the advantage of New York. But it also got the local universities to up their game, because the threat was that Stanford was going to come into their backyard, stealing money, stealing students, stealing attention. And it really caused the local universities to up their game in the innovation economy. And there were, so obviously Cornell got the big prize, but there were consolation prizes that were given to both NYU and to Columbia. And so it really, I think those 2 things were as impactful coming out of that report and have made a difference for the New York innovation economy.
So Justin, again, it's a time machine, right? So you're new on the job. By the way, we can all sing happy birthday. This is officially the 10th anniversary of the NYC Media Lab. And, I can't decide if that makes us a preteen, like emotionally, whether we're like a tween. I think we're a tween. When you arrived and started interacting with the universities and said, we're going to connect this consortium of intellectual firepower with media and technology, like, were you just welcomed with open arms? Did everyone say that's great, or was there bridge building to do?
So I came in a couple years into the project after Michael Bloomberg had announced it, after the executive director at the time, Roger Neal, had sort of set up the initial infrastructure. And in beginning with the relationship with NYU and with Columbia in particular, But after that, I think what we had to do was really start to experiment with how these relationships would work between faculty, students, and industry. And of course, that took a lot of effort. So essentially, I feel like I was sort of taking Steven's idea for NYC Media Lab on through to the last mile, to kind of figure out what those right models were. And I think over the last 8 or 9 years, we've really iterated again and again and again on what can a relationship between the university and industry look like? What are the sort of basics of running those types of R&D projects, and what are the outcomes that matter and that have some type of impact?
So before we move on to the future-facing part of this conversation, I just want to talk for a minute about the one glaring miss in the report. And glaring because I think futurism, planning for the future of the city of New York or the future of media and technology, is fraught with this one very hard problem, which is there isn't a word in the report about social media. And that's because it wasn't on the horizon. Like there was no way to imagine a thing that didn't, now it consumes our lives. But 10 years ago, it was the thing you put up your dog and baby pictures on,
But Steve, I don't think it's government's job to pick an industry. And I think that's what was very interesting about the report. They framed the sector and they framed the innovation economy. And they did not go but I don't think you want government to do that. You want the innovators to do that. They did not go out and say, well, we think within the media sector, these 3 areas are going to be the winners and we're going to back those 3 pieces. I would say that's what venture capital should be, not government.
Fair enough.
Yeah, no, Maria, that's very much on point. We tended to focus. I mean, I do take Steve's point. We should have spent more time thinking about social media, but more broadly, I'm not sure it would have changed that much in what we did, because at the end of the day, we were looking at the broader trends in the economy, and the big trend was, okay, the world's going digital tech. That means universities, knowledgeable people. And, social media is part of that trend, but we were looking more at what's the infrastructure. What's the digital age equivalent of building a new port?
All right. So now let's get to today, and then we'll start to look toward the future. There is some reasonable gloom on the horizon, even if you're an eternal optimist. There are some things that are predictable and trends that are measurable that say that New York is in for a pretty rough sledding. I think before we get into kind of future thinking a little bit, we would be remiss if we didn't put some of that on the table. So, anyone want to take a swing at gloom?
Well, let me take a swing at gloom and also point out something where I think we failed in the report. There was an underlying assumption here that a rising tide lifts all boats, that what's going to be good for the tech industry is good for everybody in New York. And what we found is, frankly, that didn't work out that way. The median person in the United States, the median New Yorker, is somebody who's a high school graduate, no college. And looking back over the last 10 years, and there was also a study done on this academically, that group basically fell behind. I mean, New York had a boom. And, look, I'm an educated person. It was good for me. But, we failed that part of the community. And looking back, I wish I'd spent more time thinking about how we could have helped them. And then maybe that as a segue to the future, I think, again, that's the community that gets hit hardest in all of this.
Maria, I don't know why I just assumed you would dive in and give us the data that we're all staring at.
The part of the economy that was hit the hardest by COVID is the small business community of New York.
Yeah.
And there are 240,000 small businesses in New York. Over 60% of them have less than 20 employees, and many of them have not been able to access all of the resources that the federal government has put out. So it's an enormous problem. And that's why we have partnered with the Borough Chambers of Commerce and and the city through EDC, raise some philanthropic money to create a program specifically to help those small businesses. And while it's early days, we're hoping that we can use that as a vehicle to connect the various resources from the large corporates, from philanthropy to those small businesses to give them both the advice, the tools, et cetera, to recover. So repairing that section of the economy is going to be a key part and a key focus of the next couple of years. The tech sector, because it's in a reasonable shape, is going to, on some level, have to grow up and take responsibility for like being a big player in the economy, because they're going to be a very important engine to bring New York back, to generate the tax revenue and to employ the people, to bring our economy back. And so the fact of a couple of the West Coast companies signing big leases here is a huge positive for the city. And so the role of technology in those companies has increased beyond where it was, say, in November of 2019.
So is your take that this remote working, work from Zoom home thing there will be an end date and the office buildings will be refilled or will repopulate?
It's going to shift around. So I think you're going to end up with a mix. I mean, listen, anybody, we're now in our crystal ball phase here, right? But the things that make New York unique are the density and the very unusual mix of backgrounds, perspectives that New York brings, right? So that we are not just monotech, we are not just mono media, we are not just mono academia. We have all of those things in the mix. And when we have sort of gone at an industry, we've done actually quite nicely by bringing those things together. So I think there remains an interest and a hunger that people have for being around that kind of diversity, if you will, of thought and opinion. And so the how physical spaces are used and laid out is probably going to change. And so maybe you're not going to have everybody working from an office for 5 days a week, but you have some work at home, and then the times that you're in the office, it's more about connecting with the people in the office in a new way. So I think certainly the video chat is not going to go away. It may replace conference calls, where we know everybody kind of zooms off and only pays half attention. But when you're on a video conference, your attention span goes up at least a little bit. But I think the interest in the density and the interest in the diversity is not going to go away. And really, it's hard to replicate somewhere else, and it's very hard to replicate on a video conference.
So Justin, you're in this very unique position. You may be better than anyone else able to talk about these two very different and now connected sectors, which is higher ed, education, and industry, media and technology. Clearly, all of these big tech companies moved to New York, took big footprints because the university system was so valuable that there was this stream, not just of ideas, but of employees. So, how when you look at those two pieces, they're now inexorably linked. Do you worry about students? Do you worry about the universities? Do you worry about CUNY?
I mean, I absolutely worry about all of those things, but I don't know. I mean, I think we're kind of thinking in this decade-long sort of time frame here, which feels like a long period of time. And I think if you look out 10 years from now, these institutions aren't going anywhere. NYU's not going anywhere. Columbia's not going anywhere. CUNY's not going anywhere. Cornell Tech will be well established and likely occupy quite a lot more of Roosevelt Island by the end of it. The investment in New York City will continue. I mean, you see that already, the fact that the tech companies are putting in even during this crisis. But I just to pick up on something Maria said, I do think there's a lot of compelling questions about some of the social issues and the relationship between these companies and society that are going to really dominate the next 10 years. And those are the things that I think we're all going to have to focus on. And luckily, I see enormous amounts of enthusiasm among the young people that I teach and that I work with to answer those questions. 10 years ago, people were aspiring to be in ad tech. I don't really meet any students at this point that aspire to be in ad tech. They aspire to, fix democracy. They aspire to effect social change. They aspire to address inequality. So I'm long-term optimistic. Whenever you bring young people into the mix, I think it brings optimism.
So let me ask each of you, obviously we've got we have a three-legged stool here. We've got government, we've got technology and media, and we've got universities. They all are inexorably linked. If you had a magic wand and you could do one thing today that would set the city on a positive course toward some economic reinvention, what's the one? And you could push one button and you get your magic wish. What would it be? I'll start with Steve.
Fixing our education system, and the stats I'm going to quote are more national, but the numbers are pretty much, I believe, the same for New York. If you take a high-performing high school graduate, top 20% of his class, who's from a low socioeconomic group, figure bottom 20%, and you magically transport that same person with those same exact grades into a top 20% family, you'll just about double his chance of graduating college. We waste a huge amount of human resources of, very talented people who should be on to doing other things. Ideally a scholarship program in New York that got people into Cornell or NYU or Columbia with an agreement that, we're going to give you this excellent aid to get you into these schools. We're going to, help you get through this on the condition that you stay in the New York area for 5 to 10 years. Would be my vote of this is a no regret move.
Okay. Next, Justin.
Well, I think I'll again take one of Steve's ideas and just maybe advance it one more step. The CUNY system seems to me to be just a huge driver, and we know that the CUNY system helps to rise up huge numbers of people, out of poverty and out of other circumstances. Really has contributed in a massive amount to the city's economy, and it seems to me in this moment incredibly right for real investment and for huge amounts of effort. So I'm hoping in the next couple of years we'll see that. We'll see big investment and big change in the CUNY system that allows it to achieve its goals.
Maria?
So Steve, I know everybody likes triangles because they think they're more stable, but I'm going to add a fourth leg to your stool, which is the corporate sector. Because you have in New York big corporates who actually are big buyers of technology and are part of the reason why large corporations come here. But I completely agree with my fellow panelists about education, but I'm going to add a third, which is our transportation system. We cannot let our public transit system die. Because if we do that, then that is a major blow to the city's ability to recover, to move its people around. And that is both all the public transit agencies, the tunnel that we need to build between New Jersey and New York City that's been delayed by the administration, the need for congestion pricing. There's any number of things that are critical to the long-term viability of this region from a transportation infrastructure perspective.
Well, I mean, since you've raised it, I'll go there. I mean, we're gathering, in early October. We're a month away from the election. I think we should at least open the conversation and ask the question: how does New York fare if there's a Democratic administration, and how does New York fare if the current administration is in office for another 4 years? That was a gaping silence.
I mean, I'm happy. I'll go first. I mean, I would say Biden's better, would be my personal bet. Both because I think he's better for the national economy, the international economy. And I think in general, the Democrats are going to be kinder to New York than Trump has proven to be.
I will
Yeah, I
refer,
don't.
I will
Go
refer
ahead.
the audience to the op-ed article over the weekend about the personalization of the attacks against New York by the Trump administration, and just leave it
Yeah.
at that.
Yeah.
I'll just add to that I'm spending a lot of my time on disinformation right now, and the amount of vitriol and sort of hatred for New York in far right circles on the internet. It's a perpetual sort of boogeyman target. Generally something that I feel like the Trump administration has drafted on, and you've seen even the Attorney General sort of draft on. It's not so bad here in this anarchist jurisdiction, really. And I don't know. I don't think we could argue. It doesn't seem on the facts arguable that New York would fare better under a second term for Trump.
All right. So with that, we opened this conversation up to our attendees and opened a Q&A and got a lot of interesting comments and tried to pull a handful of them that we thought were reflective of some of the questions from the audience. And we invited people to ask each of you individual questions or to ask the panel, and everyone asked the panel. So none of you are directly on point for any of these questions, but you're all welcome to jump in. And I'm going to start with the first one, which I think it will give us a good jumping off point. This came, and we allowed people to either put their name on the questions or to post them anonymously. So this is an anonymous question, and it reads, James Alschuler wrote, quote, "New York is dead forever. Please discuss this argument and see if you agree or disagree." So I assume we all read the James Alschuler piece when it came out. Did anyone think that he made a good? Yeah.
No.
Go ahead.
No. Yeah. No.
Justin, go further though. Justin, you wrote an op-ed about
I took it as a call to. Sorry, I took it as a
Go
call
ahead,
to
Maria.
action. I took it as a call to action. There are some serious problems that this city is facing. There's no question about that. And if the business community, government, and the citizens don't come together, there is a risk that, I don't think we're dead forever, but we're going to go through more difficult years than we've lived. And so I think if you take it as a call to action, that everybody at a personal level, you need to look around, what can you do? What can your corporation do to try to fix this? And maybe it's voting, maybe it's volunteering. I think we're in a situation where everybody does need to sort of get outside of their own selfish interests and think about, what can I do for the broader community?
That's
Justin,
right.
you wrote an op-ed about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, this you've had this panel about thinking about a decade-long kind of time frame. Maria's point about how deep do we go, or how harsh is the pain? That seems the right one to me. There's no doubt New York will not reemerge, will not come through this. That there will be a city here in 10 years' time. We'll look back, and will it have been a sharp dip, a deep chasm we had to climb out of? How bad will it have been? What will the decisions we took in that period have done to the outcome? That's where we're at right now. So I feel like at the end of the day, it's about all those choices. And Maria's almost kind of Kennedy-esque, what can you do for New York? Question is the right one.
All right, our next question comes from David at blunified.com. And here's his question. Quote, "We've seen what happens when trolls and false information took over social media. By its nature, AR can be even more powerful in its inability to deliver information and change opinions. What can we do to make sure that we don't overlay false information and hate when AR becomes ubiquitous?" Luckily, we have someone on this panel who lives in the AR space deeply, Justin. Is AR dangerous, Justin?
Listen, this is kind of to my point earlier. If you think about the next 10 years, it's almost a given that these technologies like artificial intelligence, deep learning, generally computational media are going to advance. We've got no question about that. The question is, how do we live with them? How do we incorporate them into a media environment, an information sphere that allows us to have a healthy society. And this is another place where New York is very strong. New York is, yes, we've done the investment in the engineering schools, but we've also got an enormous number of people asking these questions and thinking about these problems, many of them in the social sciences. And so it's another reason to believe that New York's going to be the place where these types of questions can get answered over the next decade.
All right. Here's another one from Anonymous. Why should media or tech have a physical home, or in our Zoom world, is the role of the big city as a media center simply over? And this is different than tech, so I understand. Let's just make the distinction. But,
I'll take a shot at this one. I don't think so. I mean, I think media of all the industries is the one that often needs people to get together. And funnily enough, a lot of my family are in the media industry. So one of them is blue collar. He's a grip on a set, actually in New York City, by the way. Justin, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but we're nowhere near augmented reality, virtual reality, where you could do away with a physical set, physical actors, etc. Production needs people in a room. Another cousin is actually a producer, similar issues. Another cousin does writing for entertainment. They're in LA, I should note. That particular cousin's in LA. But again, you get in a writer's room, you kick ideas around, pull it up a level. Scientists like to get in a room to bounce ideas around. So, the technical term is agglomeration economics, that you lower transaction costs by bringing talented people together. It makes search easier. It makes sharing ideas easier. And I've heard no one who thinks Zoom's going to be a good long-term substitute.
I'm going to be devil's advocate here, though.
I would say, video conference is a new tool that, because of COVID, has become ubiquitous, right? So COVID helped take this new tool, which was on the edge and sort of, by the early adopters, and we went through that cycle faster than anything that I've seen. But like any tool, it's a tool. It's not a new way of life. Yeah. And so we're figuring out how to use the tool to make some parts of our life more efficient and better. But that doesn't mean it's going to replace all parts of our life. And I think we're kind of now just the beginning of coming out of everything is by video. And now we're realizing, well, you know what? It's actually not so good for this. It's really good for that. So we're starting that sorting out phase of where does the new toy fit in the toy box? It's not going to replace all the toys, though.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate here. When I look at my media consumption in a day, from 7 in the morning until close to midnight, I would propose that in each of our cases, and you can debate this with me, that 70 to 80% of my media that I consume comes from the West Coast. It's either Twitter or Facebook or Netflix or Amazon Prime. Now, a little bit of national news that comes out of New York. I watch, I record and watch a little bit of ABC and NBC at 6:30. But you could make the argument, if you wanted to be, kind of, bring the fire alarm, that the bulk of my media has already left New York, and it ain't coming back. Is that bad?
But are you talking about the vehicle or the content? Right? So the New York
Honestly,
Times,
I'm talking about
that comes out of New York. The New York Post comes out of New York. ProPublica, which does fabulous investigative journalism, comes out of New York. So the content, a lot of the content, the delivery vehicles are obviously West Coast, but the content is New York. A lot of it.
I think that's a good retort. I'll take a slap on the wrist for that one.
I just add that Netflix and Amazon and those others have built studios in New York City, and are investing here. So you mentioned earlier Facebook's major investment in the Penn Station area. It's hard to say that some of these companies are purely West Coast at this point. They're here as well.
Fair enough. And the definition of a media company is all blurry and weird too.
Definitely.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to another audience question. This is from Sam Crystal. Other than remote work, how do you think the information age will change the landscape of management and business operations? How can we tool ourselves to be better equipped to navigate this landscape? It's a good question.
Yeah.
You know, I do think that we don't know quite. Yeah, go ahead, Maria. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say that, you know, some of the tools that we're using to work right now, whether it's video conferencing, our ever more profound reliance on things like Slack, you know, it's interesting to me the way that they flatten organizations, hierarchies kind of disappear, you know, the sort of effect on the corporation, as it were. I think we don't really yet know. And again, this kind of goes back to that, you know, the social sciences will have to look at these things over the next decade and tell us how it changes companies, tell us how it changes work. But it seems like we're not going backward.
Yeah,
I'll just add more from an academic. Oops, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. From an academic perspective, it's a very good question. There's a strong hypothesis that what we're seeing in the future of work is a hollowing out at the middle. In the sense that somebody once quipped, the last two human beings employed will be a brilliant AI person to manage the systems, and the physical nurse who's necessary to help patients in a hospital, because those are two jobs that are very hard to automate. High-end creativity, you know, physical dexterity combined with empathy. You know, we don't even know how to begin to think about automating that. But what we're seeing in the middle is, you know, the traditional blue-collar jobs, manufacturing have been collapsing for decades, and that's just continuing. Retail, and Maria may want to talk to this, but one of the things that we've seen is a blast of a shift to e-commerce. So, okay, great, more and more people are buying online, but that means that even, you know, retail jobs, which, you know, some of them were pleasant, paid well, are collapsing and are being replaced by being an Amazon or really a fulfillment center worker, which, if I don't know if you've ever seen videos of people who do that work, it's not fun, it's not pleasant.
All right, so last question. So the New York City business community has been pretty outspoken about their issues with the mayor. Do any of you think that the current argument between business and government is going to have a long-term impact on the city and the future of media and tech in New York, or is this just a short-term quibble that will sort itself out?
I don't think it's an argument with the mayor. We're not arguing. What we're doing is trying to make sure that there is a concerted effort to take the steps necessary to deal with the current crisis, and to make sure that it's very clear that the business community is available and willing and desirous of being a part of the solution. And so the political rhetoric about they and we, and they are bad, we are good, they being the business community, we being everybody else in the city, is not a productive narrative at this time. And so the business community can be and is willing to be a part of the solution and is interested in working with government. And for that to work, there needs to be a partnership and an openness and a willingness to do that. So it's not an argument, it's an offer to be a partner.
Fair enough. Anyone have a thought on that before we start to wrap things up? Fair enough. All right, so we are out of time. You guys have been fantastic. Steven, Justin, Maria, much appreciate your input. Excited about the future of New York and the changes ahead in this next 10 years. The good news is that because this isn't a written report, no one will be referencing this podcast back 10 years from now and going, wait, they got it wrong. So I think we're safe of that. I want to thank you all on behalf of the NYC Media Lab and everyone on the team for joining us today. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you for having us.